It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the unsinkable John Hersey and the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably John Hersey. How you doing this morning, John?
I'm good. I had a late night. I went to the Red Sox game last night, and unfortunately, they got crushed by the Astros. But it was a good time. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great, John. I'm ready to rock and roll. I mean, we have well, as our subject today, we have the immortal, William Shakespeare, considered the greatest dramatist in world literature and the greatest master of written English. So he is the bard, and his body of work is just extraordinary. And we have a lot of good stuff to discuss this morning, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was exciting. I haven't really spent much time with Shakespeare since college, actually. Did some Shakespeare performances in college, and that was a lot of fun. And so, yeah, it was really nice to this week spend some time with the bard from Avon and get into the mind of this genius. It's just incredible how much beauty and drama one person created in a lifetime, and not a very long life at that. So,
Yeah, right. His date's 1564 to 1616. So he died at age 52, and he retired several years before that, I think at age 49. So he compressed an extraordinary amount of brilliant work into a career of maybe 30 years. It truly is mind-boggling, like you said. And unfortunately, perhaps I mean, his body of work is so extensive, and the literary quality of almost all of it is at this exalted level. Perhaps his greatest works are his tragedies. Certainly, that's the literary experts often consider that to be the case. Macbeth and Hamlet, and King Lear and Othello and Romeo and Juliet. These are masterpieces. Unfortunately, Shakespeare had a tragic vision of human life, but that's I think philosophically mistaken. But we're not here to discuss Shakespeare as a philosopher. We're here to discuss him as a writer, as a literary artist. We may or may not, care for his vision of human beings and human life, but his literary art is just so magnificent. It has to be, celebrated, whether we agree with his worldview or we don't.
yeah, this is one of the interesting things that I was thinking about when I went back to Hamlet in particular. Hamlet is widely considered to be one of the best, if not the best, tragedy in history. And I was thinking because recently I've been going through some older plays. Sophocles' Antigone, also widely considered to be one of the best tragedies. And if you compare the two, which we can talk a little bit about their plots, but the hero, so to speak, of Antigone herself, is, although that we have a tragedy here, we have a much greater nobility. And I think it's really interesting to compare the trajectories of Hamlet and Antigone, and see how tragedy can be done in different ways to, even if it is tragic, still give the reader a message that they can walk away with that's powerful and uplifting.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Sophocles also, along with Shakespeare, they're probably the two greatest tragedians in world literature. And in fact, I want to read famous line from King Lear that was written by Shakespeare, obviously, but it might have been written by Sophocles. It sounds like Sophocles. But anyhow, maybe the place to start. Well, we should discuss a little bit of his childhood. I was ready to jump into some of the beautiful lines and discuss Shakespeare's mastery of written English. But we should give at least a brief account of his life, right?
Sure. Yeah, there's not a lot. It's kind of interesting how little is known about Shakespeare's life, and to fill in the gaps, people have weaved some fabricated tales, some dramatic tales to fill in some of the gaps, which is somewhat ironically fitting for this king of drama. But we know a little bit. He was born the son of John Shakespeare, who was this prosperous glover. He made gloves, and Mary Arden, the daughter of a wealthy landowner. He probably went to a Latin school about a quarter of a mile from his house. It was a free school, and it would have been common for him to go there. But he didn't go to college, which is very interesting. We're talking about one of the greatest writers in history, and many of his contemporaries, many of the people that looked down on him, and we'll talk about Robert Greene in particular. They were college educated and thought little of this jack of all trades, as Greene put it. But at 18, he knocks up a woman who is 8 years older than him, Anne Hathaway. And
you're a master of the language too. I like that. Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah,
all right. I see. Yeah. Well, yeah. She gets pregnant. Yeah, because their first child is born 6 months after the wedding, right?
Right. Yeah. So it's likely the case that Anne Hathaway's parents would not have consented to their getting married, because she was actually from a more well-to-do family than he was. From what we can tell, and so he, in a sense, sort of, he gets into this relationship that perhaps otherwise he couldn't have, and ultimately they have 3 kids together that survive, two to adulthood, and one passes sadly at age of 11. We don't know why, but people speculate that Shakespeare's career started in the mid 1580s. The first real historical mention that we have of him is from 1592, and it's this criticism of Shakespeare that I mentioned by Robert Greene. He wrote, "There is an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, and with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you. And being an absolute Johannes factotum, or jack of all trades, it is in his own conceit the only shake scene in the country." It's hard to read that. It's not very clear, plain English. But here Greene is he's referencing a line out of Shakespeare's Henry V, when he talks about the tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide. And he's poking fun at this guy that thinks, well, he's this jack of all trades that thinks he can write, but he can't hold a candle to us educated folk.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Greene's talking here about himself and Christopher Marlowe, and people and some others who went through the universities, which Shakespeare had a grammar school. So far as we know, Shakespeare went to the grammar school, and that's it. And, a couple of points, John, but before you go on, that occurred to me. First of all, it's really kind of strange that we know so little about Shakespeare's actual life. I mean, this is 16th and 17th century England. This isn't the Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of records from that era. So here's the greatest writer in the English language, and we know so little about his life from an era where we have a lot of records. I mean, Elizabeth I was queen. There's a lot known, but not about Shakespeare. And the other thing that occurred to me, while you were talking, is again and again we've seen a theme, on the Hero Show. How many geniuses did not have a great deal of formal schooling? We did. They dropped out of school, or they never went to school, or they didn't have an opportunity to go to school. And one of the heroes we did. And by the way, this is like episode 50 or 51. What 51, number?
51, I think.
51. Yeah, I mean, it's gone. The time. It's been so much fun. It's just the time is just kind of.
It's almost a year since we. Yeah. It's about a year since we began. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I remember it was mid to late June when we did our first episode on Frederick Douglass. Yeah. But Yeah, I'm reminded of Thomas Edison, one of the heroes that we discussed, who, finished fourth grade. Yeah, he got kicked out. He got kicked out of school. The headmaster told Mrs. Edison that her son's brain was addled. As she put it. So it's extraordinary how often that's the case, and we'll discuss it because as we go along on this show, there are people, scholars today, not many, but there are some scholars today who insist that Shakespeare didn't write these plays and this great poetry ascribed to him. That Francis Bacon is actually the author, or some other candidate. Which we'll discuss the perversity of that. I want to reference back to Thomas Edison again when we get there. But sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof, says Jesus. And so sufficient unto the minute right now is Shakespeare's biography. So what else do we know about his life, John?
Well, 1590s, early 1590s, he's working as an actor, writer, and part owner of a play company, Lord Chamberlain's Men. And after 1594, everything that he wrote was exclusively played by his company. And this certainly benefited him financially. It seems that he became fairly wealthy off the profits of some of his plays. And by the late 1590s, this wasn't common in the day, but the written out plays, the folios, the works that they actually published. So most of the time you're not reading plays, you're going to a playhouse and you're seeing it. Now they're publishing plays, and most of the time it wasn't the case that the authors were big name people whose names would actually sell the thing. But by the late 1590s, this is the case for Shakespeare. He's done so much great work that these plays are published with his name on them, and that actually helps to boost sales, and of course his reputation. So his career is often divided up into the early, middle, and late stages. We know that he wrote around 39 plays, some of which were collaborations. John Fletcher, the ones toward the end of his career, John Fletcher would go on to sort of take Shakespeare's place as the lead writer for what was Lord Chamberlain's Men became the King's Men when Elizabeth I died and James I ascended to the throne. He gave them a royal patent and they become a royal company. But anyway, so 39 plays, 154 sonnets, I believe, and 3 very long narrative poems. And we know roughly when most of these were published, but not exactly. I think scholars have pieced things together from some various sources. Ben Jonson being one of them, wrote collected works and noted therein some details about Shakespeare's comings and goings. He was an actor in some of Ben Jonson's plays, so we know a little bit about what Shakespeare was doing. In broad outline, we know that he was living between London and Stratford upon Avon, and in the late 1590s, he's got enough wealth now that he buys the second largest house in Stratford called New Place. He builds the company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, still at this time in 1599. They build the Globe Theatre on the Thames, on the River Thames, and so Shakespeare's making his way back and forth between London and Stratford, really kind of doing both. And then in the around 1608, I guess, is when he sort of retires. And we got to think back in 1603 roughly. So the bubonic plague is ravaging London, and many of the theaters are closing months on end. I think we can relate to this. We're looking at the entertainment industry today, which has been basically gutted by authoritarian lockdowns. And they were dealing with something similar. I mean, playhouses were closed for months and months on end. About 60 months between the year 1603 and 1610, playhouses were closed. And And so people like Shakespeare, who made their living as an actor, didn't really have that piece of income anymore, and so he had less and less ties to London and spent more and more time in Stratford upon Avon, and ultimately retired at the age of 49 in 1613, and dies 3 years later.
Yeah, and nobody knows from what, right? Because I think shortly before his death, if I remember correctly, he made out his will or something, and he'd commented that I'm in great health, I'm in perfect health, and then shortly thereafter he passed away. I've read somewhere that he, like the night before he died or something, he had a drinking party with some of his buddies,
Right.
and I don't. Was Ben Jonson one of them? I don't remember.
Ben Jonson and Drayton.
Yeah, yeah, but right. Is Michael Drayton or Christopher Drayton? I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, I should
I'm
know
looking to
this.
you.
Yeah, Christopher Drayton, I think, but don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But anyhow, writers themselves. Ben Jonson, a poet of great note, and he died right after that. I don't know. Is the takeaway from this should be the perils of alcohol? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess the Vicar of Stratford wrote about 50 years after this happened, so perhaps clouded by time. We don't know for sure, but he said that Shakespeare, Drayton, and Ben Jonson had a merry meeting, and it seems drank too hard, for Shakespeare died of a fever there contracted. So probably not, maybe not the alcohol. Alcohol doesn't cause fever so far as I know. Maybe they thought so at the time, and maybe it was related to the alcohol, but perhaps they stayed out a little too late while they were drinking and didn't feel, they get that warm afterglow from the alcohol. But who knows, really? Like so many of the details of Shakespeare's life, it is very much shrouded in mystery, and we have bits and pieces here and there, and much of it is fabricated. So it's like I said, ironic that this king of drama, his life has been turned into a thing of drama. And I know one of the things you want to get into is this speculation about, who else might have written Shakespeare's plays. I think, well, if we had more knowledge of Shakespeare's biography, this would be less of a common thesis. But there's that movie a few years back called Anonymous, and I forget who directed that, but that movie really put forth the theory that, and this has become a more common theory among people. Well, the details of the plays and sonnets that Shakespeare was writing don't fit the biographical details that we know of Shakespeare's life. Well, again, we don't know much about Shakespeare's life, but they're presuming that there has to be this connection based on biography, that what Shakespeare was engaged in was somehow autobiographical, which is a very confused notion that doesn't fit the artistic standards of the time at all. So I'm sure you want to talk more about this.
Yeah, let's just do it right now. I mean, but before we get into Shakespeare's actual writing, because it's been this is a bit of rumor that's been around for a while, and it's driven to a significant extent by something you mentioned before from Richard Green, which is it was Richard Green, right? Not Robert Green, as I recall. Richard Green, I think was who was
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a writer, of ability himself. But it's driven by this academic snobbery, at least in part, by the idea that, well, Shakespeare, well, he went to grammar school. He couldn't. That's it. He couldn't possibly have written created these magnificent works of art. It must have been somebody who went through the universities, who went through Oxford or Cambridge, a leading university, and was very, very educated and cultured, and it's driven by that kind of belief by academics who look down their nose at the common man who's he's an uneducated lout. He couldn't possibly have written King Lear or Macbeth. It's not possible. Now, I mean, the flaws. I don't even want to dignify it with the term reasoning, but the flaws of such a belief. First of all, I mean, Shakespeare's actually. Here's what we do know. Shakespeare was known by his contemporaries as the authors of these works. I mean, Ben Jonson knew him personally, and a writer, of great merit himself. And what was that famous line from Ben Jonson, that Shakespeare was not of an age, but for all time.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare held up a mirror to life. It's another famous line about him from Ben Jonson. These guys knew Shakespeare personally. To the point where they go visit him in his apartments and walk in. What are you working on today, Will? And Shakespeare says, "Oh, I'm writing this story about this guy who wants to be king, but he's got the king as a guest in his castle, and his wife wants him to kill the king, but he feels loyalty to the king." And Ben Jonson or somebody says, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting story." These people knew Shakespeare. They knew what he was working on. They actually worked with him, when he was doing the stage direction at the Globe Theater or at other venues, in the theater, where he's telling the actors how to play this part. I mean, they knew him personally to have done this. This is very powerful evidence. So we don't have that. We discussed Francis Bacon on the Hero Show, and we know what a genius Bacon was in the philosophy of science, and as a great writer himself. But we don't have any evidence of anybody who knew Francis Bacon personally, doing the stage directions for Macbeth and telling the actors how to play their roles. We don't have any evidence for that.
Yeah, I mean, Francis Bacon's got to be the most bizarre hypothesis, because he was a politician most of his life.
Right.
And he longed to do more in the humanities, but primarily philosophy. And he thought he didn't have nearly enough time just to devote to that alone. So to presume, on top of everything that he did accomplish, which is incredible, both being a career politician and really formulating and bringing together the culmination of thought that really defined the Enlightenment and showed the way forward for Newton, to presume that he could do that and write 154 sonnets, 39 plays, and 3 narrative poems on top of all that is just bizarre.
Yeah, and to do it without the knowledge of his peers. So we're doing the stage directions for Hamlet, when this given production, Shakespeare himself probably starred. He probably played a part in the play, but he certainly, as the author, he's instructing the other actors how this character should be played, what this character's thinking, and everything. And Shakespeare's buddies saw him in that role. They knew him in that role, not anybody else in that role. So I mean, I think it's driven this. It's this perverse kind of intellectual game that some academics, like to play, and driven, I think, by intellectual snobbery. The analogy I'd like to make here is, Thomas Edison, with his 4th grade, schooling, lived in 19th century America, so we know for sure that he's the guy who invented the phonograph and the electric lighting system, because he's it was famous at the time. Any number of people knew him in his laboratory doing this work. But if this was in 16th century England, and we didn't have all of this evidence that it was Edison, the same snobbery was, Edison couldn't have done that. He barely got through 4th grade. Somebody else must have done it. It's a perverse intellectual game, and to their credit, the world's leading Shakespeare scholars scorn that hypothesis. They know that Shakespeare, who wrote Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare, that's who wrote them.
And to quote a sentiment from Shakespeare on this, from a Midnight Summer Night's Dream, "Lord, what fools these mortals be."
Right. Shakespeare has a line for every occasion. He is the master. He is the absolute master of it. And so let's move into some of the mastery of the language, the immortal lines. We can only do a handful of hundreds. There's books and websites devoted to quotes from Shakespeare that are just immortal. But one phrase that I love, and the context for it, the derivation is interesting, is to be filled with the milk of human kindness, which is a beautiful expression about goodwill and benevolence and kindness, which in reality is a really good thing, to be sincerely filled with the milk of human kindness. It's interesting. Where does that line come from? A lot of people don't know, don't know who says it and in what context. And that's Lady Macbeth, hurling that at her husband as a criticism. As an insult, you're too filled with the milk of human kindness to be the equal of your power lust. You want to be king, but you want you got to man up and kill the king. And as if that was what being a man, was all about. So it's interesting that this beautiful line extolling, a sincere kindness and a sincere generosity of spirit towards our brothers and sisters is originates as a criticism, an accusation against somebody who doesn't want to be a murderer.
Yeah.
But the milk of human kindness is just the imagery is so vivid. I mean, what comes to my mind is a mother, nurturing a baby, suckling the milk, of her breast, the milk of life, and mothers generally love their babies and their children, fight to the death to defend, their children from harm, that kind of nursing, suckling on the milk of life, the milk of a mother's kindness. It's beautiful imagery, and it's perfect for Shakespeare's, for expressing what Shakespeare's talking about, his goodwill, or one of Ayn Rand's favorite terms, benevolence, towards our brothers and sisters. Shakespeare, he does find the words, doesn't he?
Yeah, and one particularly rich source of just, what do I want to say here? Just these quotes that will live on forever, they're just immortal, is Hamlet. And another one that's commonly misunderstood. So as you explained with that one, the context it's kind of funny. And it's funny how often Shakespeare's best lines are given to fairly minor characters, some of his best work. But, to be or not to be, that is the question. And, I think the common misconception for those who failed this class in high school is that Hamlet's talking about killing himself, right? But in fact, he's speaking about killing Claudius.
Right. Yeah, that's again an immortal line. You're talking about great lines from secondary characters in King Lear, with powerful, gut-wrenching drama. I mean, if you see the Royal Shakespeare perform it, you'll just walk out of there so depressed. I mean, it's so powerful, it just kicks your guts out. But was the fool, the court jester? In Shakespeare's plays, when the court jester speaks, he generally speaks the truth. He says to the king, "Your problem, Lear, is that you grew old without growing wise." And I've used that expression in philosophy classes over and over again, because philosophy, to have philosophia, is to have love of wisdom. And I always say to the students, that's not going to be your problem. You guys are not going to grow old without growing wise, right? Tell these 20-year-old kids, because if you do, your old philosophy professor is going to rear up out of his grave and he's going to kick you a butt. But that's a great line also.
Brevity is the soul of wit, Polonius and Hamlet.
Yeah, ironic coming from him, who's anything but succinct or concise in his formulations. Yeah, and speaking of Polonius, who's not perhaps not the man of the strongest character possibly in Shakespeare's plays, but when he tells his son Laertes, "To thine own self be true,"
right?
And then and it follows as the night the day, thou canst not then play false with any man. To thine own self be true. What a beautiful line that is, expressing poetically the virtues of egoism, of being that the essence of proper egoism is to be true to your own soul, to be true to your own self.
Though this be madness, yet there is method in it. Another great Polonius line that, it's funny how these lines, even if we don't know and recognize their sources, they're things that have really shaped our thinking for hundreds of years. I mean, shaped thinking in general for hundreds of years. But and today there's still things that shape how we think about the world.
Yeah, yeah. It's just the way Shakespeare just we marvel for centuries now with the mastery of the English language. Cry havoc and let's slip the dogs of war. Wow. What a great line, from Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. Cry havoc and let's slip the dogs of war. Let's go to battle. If you want to say let's go to battle, you can't put it any more brilliantly than that line from Julius Caesar. But I was talking before about Lear, which I'm not an expert. Just give my opinion as a dilettante here. I think Lear is Shakespeare's most powerful tragedy. But some of the lines here, okay, let's listen to this. Like flies to wanton boys are men to gods. They kill us for their sport. Wow. Let me repeat that. Like flies to wanton boys are men to the gods. They kill us for their sport. That sounds like, that's what I was saying before, that sounds like Sophocles, right? That could have been Oedipus speaking, because that's what the Oedipus saga is all about. The gods, the gods. Oedipus. I'm talking about Sophocles now. I tried everything I possibly could to escape this destiny of mine, of murdering my father and marrying my mother. I tried everything I could, but the fates or the gods or some cosmic force made this happen against my will, and now I'm being punished for it. Mm-hmm. What kind of gods are those? This is the whole point of the Sophoclean. It's not a trilogy, but the saga, of Oedipus the king, Antigone, and Oedipus at Colonus. Are the gods really gods? Are they truly worthy of worship? Sophocles raising powerful moral criticisms of the gods in classical Greece, and brilliant dramatic exposition. Well, this line from Shakespeare, this sounds like something Oedipus should have said. Like flies to wanton boys are men to the gods. They kill us for their sport. The deep thought there, the profound thought about God or the gods, and the beauty of the language, the way Shakespeare formulated the expression, like flies to wanton boys are men to the gods. They kill us for their sport. You just marvel at the way he finds the thoughts and the words to raise in us these powerful emotions.
Yeah, it's an elevated language that really speaks deep, and often there's just no better way to put it. I must be cruel only to be kind. Thus bad begins and worse remains behind. Hamlet as well. And this line that you're comparing to Sophocles, I think it's interesting. The similar idea here that men are sort of the playthings of the gods. But what I so like about Antigone is that, to go back to this play.
Mm-hmm. And we have to do Sophocles on the Hero Show.
Absolutely.
Magnificent, right? Absolutely magnificent.
He should definitely be celebrated on the Hero Show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So two brothers are vying for the throne, one rightly and one wrongly, and they battle, and both end up being killed. And King Creon ascends to the throne and orders that one who is actually in the wrong be buried and the other not. And Antigone, their sister, has none of this. She thinks, he must be buried, and her plight here shows that there is this distinction between royal edict and moral law, and that moral law takes precedence over royal edict, and that you have to follow and do what is right. You have to have integrity to your moral ideals. And Hamlet is in something of a similar position. So Hamlet's father is King Hamlet, killed by Claudius, who takes the throne, and Hamlet finds this out from the ghost of his dead father. But he dallies in his response to this. And he says at one point, I think this really speaks to the problem in Hamlet's character. He says that there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. This is a sign of Hamlet's moral relativism. And this play is in part famous because the way that Shakespeare illustrates this process of going mad in Hamlet. And the best actors really bring this out. We think that Hamlet, is he going insane? Is he perfectly lucid but playing the part? And it's hard to tell. But at one point he says, "How all occasions do inform against me and spur my dole revenge." I think dole revenge really captures Hamlet's whole modus operandi in this play. On the other side of this coin, so Hamlet's saying that only thinking makes the bad bad, but Claudius knows. He says, "Oh, my offense is rank; it smells to heaven." He knows that what he has done is awful. But Hamlet loses his grip on rationality, or at least that's my interpretation. And this just goes to show you that there is no dichotomy between the moral and the rational. If you lose your grip on the facts, then you'll have a very hard doing what's right. And so how might Shakespeare have done this play differently? Well, he's got a brilliant mechanism here for revealing Claudius's guilt. There's a play company that's come to stage a play for the king and his court, and Hamlet has them do a scene that is very much analogous to how Claudius is supposed to have killed his brother, the king. And Hamlet knows that he can gauge Claudius's guilt by seeing his reaction to this scene as it unfolds in the play. And sure enough, it reveals that Claudius is guilty. And if all Shakespeare wanted to do was entertain us, he could have taken this incredible, complex, and beautiful plot piece and quickly come to an ending of this play right there. It's clear that Claudius is guilty. Hamlet knows what he has to do. We're talking about revenge in a different age, but he doesn't do it. So if we think about the line "revenge is a dish best served cold," and we think about revenge in this context being legal, lawful revenge, there are plenty of things that Hamlet could have done. And the problem is, so cold in this context, revenge is a dish best served cold. Cold means, you've had time to get away from your emotions, to step back and to evaluate them rationally. And this is what Hamlet never gets. He never gets rational distance and really evaluates the situation. And so he never comes to what I think would be a proper conclusion of this play. But in any case, instead of giving us this incredible entertainment, what he did instead was really revolutionize the tragedy. And this play is just incredible for the number of plot twists that Shakespeare uses to, in the end, doom every major person in the play. And it's just incredible writing.
It is. By the end of Hamlet, the stage is littered with corpses. Everybody's dead. And while you're talking about Hamlet, you reminded me, frailty, thy name is woman. Another great line, because he thinks Ophelia has been unfaithful to him. He's mistaken about that. But also Gertrude, his mother, where Hamlet is right. Hamlet's thinking, my father was what they say, every inch a king. He was a moral paragon. He was a man. In Yiddish terminology, he was a mensch. He was a real man. You, my mother, you know that you were married to him for all these years, and it's like within weeks or maybe a month after my father dies, you marry this Bill Clinton kind of sleazy, this slime bag. How is that possible? And he's bitterly disappointed with his mother, on this, and he has reason to be. But this is a great story, and we have to say at least one interpretation here. Hamlet is a philosophy student at the University of Wittenberg. And he's home now because his father was murdered, like you said. He's the rightful king. He's Prince Hamlet. He's the son of the king. Claudius has usurped the throne, and Hamlet's got multiple reasons, all of them good, to kill the usurper and take the throne. One, he knows that Claudius is a regicide. He murdered the king. Two, he's not next in line to the throne anyway. Hamlet is. And three, if you care about the people of Denmark, as a good monarch does, as King Hamlet did, as King Claudius does not, and as Prince Hamlet would, then for the sake of your country, you get rid of this guy and have an honest man. Not a moral, somebody who's not on intimate terms with moral principles. Let's put it that way, regarding Claudius. He's got all these good reasons to kill Claudius and take his place as the rightful king, but he's constantly thinking about it. Is it right? Is that the right thing to do? How do I know the ghost is telling the truth? If I'm going to do it, how do I do it? And this is part of what Shakespeare's showing us here is paralysis by analysis. Hamlet thinks too much. It's almost like he's saying, don't call upon a philosopher to do a job where you need a man of action. And Hamlet is a man of thought, not a man of action. And unfortunately, Shakespeare has this mind-body dichotomy that is played out in Hamlet. That if you're a thinker, then you're not a doer. And thinkers don't take decisive action. And if you're in a context which calls for decisive action, to have a philosopher or thinker is the wrong guy. And you can really contrast that with John Galt in Atlas Shrugged, where Ayn Rand ties together mind and mind-body integration. And John Galt, the thinker, the philosopher par excellence, is also the man of action par excellence, who initiates the strike that brings down the Luthor's regime. But Shakespeare and Ayn Rand, two brilliant literary geniuses, have very different philosophical views on the role of reason in human life.
Absolutely.
So, I just want to say something here, because Macbeth, we're going to run out of time. Maybe we should do a second show on Shakespeare, Joe. This is so rich. There's so much.
We haven't touched on the sonnets or any of the comedy. Yeah, I mean, there is more than we can do in 10 hero shows. But
right. But we should devote, I think, a second one to Shakespeare. It's so rich because, Macbeth, great tragedy, driven by power lust. I mean, the interpretation often is Macbeth is ambitious. He wants to be the king. But as Harry Binswanger, Dr. Binswanger once said to me, ambition's a virtue. Macbeth's a power luster. And that's a good insight. And his wife, even more so. She wants her husband to be the king. And so he acts on this impulse, this urge, this passion. And, it leads ultimately not only to his wife commits suicide, he's killed in the end. At the end of the play, Macduff comes in with the tyrant's head, the blood dripping from his neck, that's with Macbeth's head. And you can see Shakespeare's, the deeper philosophic reasons for his tragic vision. If you act on passion, power lust in this case, or jealousy in the case of Othello, or vanity and flattery in the case of Lear. If you act on passion is blind. It doesn't give you a rational plan or roadmap on how to get from A to Z. Passion is blind and leads you to destruction. But thought is paralysis. Thought, and showed in Hamlet, is the enemy of decisive action. And so, reason gets us nowhere, and so Hamlet dallies too long. He's thinking about it over and over again. He waits too long because of that. When he finally kills the king, it's too late to save his own life. Reason leads him to destruction, whereas passion leads Macbeth and these other tragic characters in Shakespeare's plays to destruction. Well, what's left? We've covered the waterfront. reason and emotion, reason and passion. Either one, leads to calamity. And so you can see, if we act on passion, we're doomed. If we go by reason, we won't act, and we're doomed. So man is doomed. I mean, he's got it's a brilliant philosophic vision. I mean, I think he's completely mistaken, and I think Ayn Rand nails it in Atlas Shrugged. But I mean, literally, Shakespeare he's a giant. This is just brilliant. Powerful themes, even if they're philosophically mistaken. Powerful themes dramatized in brilliant literary art. I mean, I just marvel at Shakespeare.
Yeah. I think that nails his overall philosophic vision. I was reviewing A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I came across this quote that I think is relevant in this context because it sort of hints at a different approach, and one that Shakespeare didn't really take or advocate. But Helena, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, she says that love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind. And, this is love here is a passion. And she's saying it's not skin deep. It's more than that. You fall in love with a person's personality. But, I think this is as close as Shakespeare got to, and I could be wrong because I'm no expert on Shakespeare, but this at least is a positive, points in a positive direction. It's not one that he explored very much.
Yeah. I get your point. And, Shakespeare in the histories does not convey very often the same tragic vision that he does in his tragedies. And, John, even if we're going to do 10 shows on Shakespeare, I feel a need, compelled to read the immortal St. Crispin's Day speech, which I cannot read this without crying. So you just have to bear with me. But the audience, you'll see why. If you're not familiar with this speech, you'll see why. Now this is set the context. Is there anything else you want to say on Hamlet before we go? Okay. This is from Henry V, and one of Shakespeare's great histories, and it's set right before the Battle of Agincourt, decisive battle in the 100 Years' War, which was the 15th century, so it's almost 200 years before Shakespeare's time. And the English army is outnumbered by the French 5-1. I mean, the English have something like 5,000 guys, and the French have like 25,000 guys. And King Henry V's guys are saying, well, maybe too bad we don't have more troops. And, his subordinate Westmoreland says, "Oh, that we now had here but 1/10,000 of those men in England that do no work today." It's St. Crispin's Day, it's a holiday. Henry V. "What's he that wishes so, my cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin, if we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. By Jove, I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear. Such outward things dwell not in my desires. But if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my cuz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honor as one man more, methinks, would share from me for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more. Rather proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when the day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the village vigil feast his neighbors and say, tomorrow is St. Crispian. Then he will strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, these wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, Yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they would not hear, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day.
Wow. That is a hero's speech there. That is just absolutely incredible.
What an ode to courage. I mean, you just can't do it any better than that. It's just brilliant. Now, we want fewer guys. We want fewer guys in our eyes. Let the French get some more guys. Because, that just makes it greater honor for us to go out and, fight this battle against overwhelming odds and triumph as in history, in truth they did. At Agincourt against tremendous odds. So, but what a speech and a beautiful, powerful ode to bravery. That speech is. A lot of times in my life, I'm a literature lover, and I was an English major in college. A lot of times in my life, I've been afraid of something that I knew was the right thing to do, but I was afraid. I went back and reread the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V. And you go, wow, courage. Courage is a virtue.
Well, there's no way to follow that, Andy.
Well, let's draw a line here then. As far as reading, and some of the beautiful love sonnets, let's do that for next week, because nothing can follow that St. Crispin's Day speech and the ode to courage, as I think of it. So let us salute the great man, the greatest master of English literature, the greatest writer in the English language, the GOAT. William Shakespeare is the GOAT, the greatest of all time as a master of the English language. And I want to wish you, John, to have a heroic day, and you and everybody out there in Hero Land, lead a more heroic life, everybody. Have a great day. We'll be back on the Hero Show next week with some more Shakespeare.